Today, I'm joined by the founder and owner of Onlinejobs.ph. He's helped over 100,000 people outsource differently. He is the new author of The Outsourcing Lever. And you're just going to love this interview, I think. So get ready for tons of value. Mr. John Jonas, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
It's my pleasure. Glad to have you here, John. So, John, I want to start. You're doing a ton of different things. What has motivated you to write this book, The Outsourcing Lever?
So, I've been doing this since 2005. I've been hiring people in the Philippines since 2005, and I've had so many people ask, and there's so much that goes into it. Like, I've learned so much and done tons of interviews of other people succeeding doing it, and I wanted to put it all together into one piece. Like, I get quite, oh, how do I pay these people? Oh, how do I deal with this problem? Oh, what about that thing? Or how do I get better results? Or like, I have all these things that, like, oh, I have an answer for every one of these things, but let's figure out a better way. And then there's the other side of it. Like, I've worked 17 hours a week since like 2008.
Wow.
And that's a long time. And that's a lot of experience of, like, people talk about the 4-hour work week and few people ever get there, right? Like, I've been there and I'm there and I know how. And so, like, let me give you my experience of how to do this. So that was my motivation in writing. And that's what I cover in the book.
Well, I really love that, because I think anyone that's trying to create some sort of online stream of income understands how important having help is. You just can't scale it yourself. You need support systems in place, but it can be really hard to execute on that. I've been trying to find a good assistant for quite some time now, and it just seems like it's really hard to make that fit. So I'm wondering, on your side, John, what are the top 3 things that I can do to make sure that I get a great virtual assistant?
Yeah. So, and I was like you, like, I tried all kinds of stuff before I figured out, like, oh, I can hire in the Philippines and it's way more affordable. And but even when I did it, I had no idea, like, oh, they're really talented and really good and their English is really great. So, the top 3 things you can do to make sure you get a good assistant are, number 1, follow a recruiting process. I mean, that's, if you just go and like, oh, I'm going to search resumes. Oh, that's the one I want to hire. You're not going to find a great one. Like, it's not how it works. So that's 1, follow a good recruiting process. Number 2, have correct expectations. Like, I get too many people that are like, oh, I need someone that can do social media for me and can build me a custom website and can do logo design and can write my book. And, like, no, that doesn't exist, right? Like, you have some good expectations. Like, you want a specific defined role here, right? And then number 3, hire a full-time person in the Philippines. That'll make such a difference over, like, oh, I know someone in Vietnam. Oh, I got a contact in Brazil, or, whatever it is.
Yeah.
Do it in the Philippines.
So why, let's break that down a little bit, because I've worked with people from all over the world, everyone from America to India to Pakistan to all over the place. What makes people in the Philippines differently? Why is a virtual assistant in the Philippines just a step above the rest?
Yeah, so I've had the same experience. I've worked all over the world, and it wasn't until I hired this person in the Philippines the first time in 2005 that, like, really changed my life. So there's a big set of cultural differences in the Philippines that don't exist anywhere else in the world. It's not that, like, any one of these things doesn't exist elsewhere. Mm-hmm. It's kind of the combination of these things. So number 1, they're honest, like, to the point where my guys in the Philippines have my credit cards and they have access to my PayPal account and they have access to my personal email account and our servers, and they don't pay themselves because they would know how much each other made. But other than that, like, you're going to start hiring someone and you're going to find out, oh my gosh, they're really trying really hard to be honest with me. And that's a big deal, especially when you're working virtually.
Yeah.
Number 2, they're loyal almost to a fault of, like, when you hire them and you treat them well, they'll never stop working for you. Like, the first guy I ever hired in 2005 still works for me today. And he's amazing today. Like, he was making $250 a month when I hired him. And today he makes a lot more than that because he's so dang good for me, right? But you have to treat them well. Number 3, they're, like, English is a primary language in the Philippines. Like, the one time I was there, I was in a hotel, I was in the lobby, and and there was a Filipino guest and a Filipino the desk clerk arguing with each other in English, right? So it's like science is taught in English in elementary school, right? Not always, but often. So communication is never an issue. Internet is super pervasive, so they can work from home, which means you don't have to go through a service to find them, which is a really big cost difference. And then they're not entrepreneurial. So like they don't want to steal your business. Like, I mean, I remember the first time I ever outsourced to India, the first question was, well, what's your business model with this?
Yeah.
Like, well, what does that matter to you? You know, like, no, we just want to make sure that, well, what he really meant was like, can we steal this or not?
Right.
And that's not the case in the Philippines. Like, they don't want to steal your business. They don't want to steal your domain. They don't want to steal your website. They want a job. They're not entrepreneurial. And so, and that's not obviously not the case with everyone, but
it sounds to me
generally
like
entrepreneurial.
it sounds to me like those are good questions to get out of the way on the front end too, right? You know,
Yeah.
where do you see yourself in a few years, right?
Yeah, right. So like the big thing is you combine all these things together, and the Philippines is a third world country, and they don't like to call it a third world country. They like to call it a developing economy or an emerging economy, whatever. But it's hard to find a job in the Philippines. It's hard to find a full-time job in the Philippines. It's hard to find long-term work in the Philippines. They look up to foreigners, which is super different than most places in the world where they're like, oh, my idiot boss. No, in the Philippines, they're like, oh, dude, my boss is American, and they'll brag about you to their friends. And it creates a situation where like they're very pleasing by nature and they want to make you happy. And as long as you treat them well, and this is a really big, important piece, I keep mentioning it, but as long as you treat them well, like they'll go above and beyond what you ask them to do to make sure that you're happy and that they keep their job because they really want their job.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. And especially during the era of COVID-19 where employment can be really difficult to find. I think it's a powerful thing to find the right people. Like you said, the culture matters a lot, I think, and the motivation of the people you're going to be working with certainly matters a lot. I'm curious. So we're talking about your website, Onlinejobs.ph. John, what makes your website different? Do you have special screening process, or is there any sort of accountability on the back end? Like maybe a VA comes in and they end up being a scam artist or something. Do you have anything like that to make sure that you're hiring and finding the right people?
So let me take a step away. Let me go sideways for a second, actually.
Okay.
So first of all, Onlinejobs.ph is a job board. So like we have over 1 million Filipino profiles, like 55,000 Filipinos signed up last month.
Wow.
Right. And it almost tripled since COVID happened, like the monthly numbers, right? So we don't take a markup of people's salary. We're not an agency. We don't have an office in the Philippines. So that right there is like the biggest difference between us and anywhere else you're going to go, where like someone else has an office, they recruit the Filipinos, they bring them into the office, they mark up their salaries and lease them back to you. We're none of that, right? Yeah. So like that person that was making $250 a month in 2005, I was paying $750 a month. Well, with us, you pay $250 a month, right? We don't take a cut of that salary. So that's the first big difference between someone else and us. And there aren't very many other websites that are like us. There are a few. We're like 10 times bigger. So that's another difference. So really, like our number one priority is having employers have a good experience.
Yeah.
So we do so much stuff on the back end to filter out scammers, to get rid of people from India trying to find jobs, to ban people as we get complaints about them. Like we do so much that doesn't prevent people from having bad experiences. But the likelihood of having a good experience, let's see, if someone else recruits for you, you're going to be 50-50. You do your own recruiting and you follow a good recruiting process, you're going to be like 75% good. Mm-hmm. Right? That's a big difference. And that we see that over, like we have a recruiting service that will recruit for you, and I hate it because we're 50-50 with it. Right. So that's the big difference, is like you're going to recruit for yourself. You have a much higher shot at doing it if you follow a recruiting process. So you're just going to have a better experience.
Yeah. So, and I think that makes a lot of sense. In fact, I've actually literally just this weekend hired someone. And so when I went to the job posting board, I posted my job. And you can post for free, which is kind of cool too. You can post for free and get a bunch of applicants. I had 55 applicants the same day. So I had, like you said, a list of questions that I wanted to ask them, and I was able to cut them in about half with those questions and just kind of process from there. Another thing that I've started executing on when looking for an assistant is I'll record a video. It's about a 15-minute video to kind of explain exactly what I'm looking for. And if, when I get to that point in the process, say, hey, go check out this video, watch it, and let's communicate a little bit more effectively. Do you have any other tips on top of that that might help to clarify exactly what you need with your VA?
Yeah. So I love the recording a video thing. Like if you can explain something up front in the job post, you'll probably get better applicants. One thing in the recruiting process so there's a couple things. Your question was, how do you clarify with the VA?
Right. Because communication, I think, is probably the biggest challenge when working with someone
Super
virtually.
important.
Yeah.
So just make sure you have a defined role, that you're not looking for, like I said before, you're not looking for someone to do programming and write a book,
Yeah.
right? Like those two things don't go together at all. And yet I see that regularly, right? So you have a defined role. And then like in your job post, if you go post saying, hey, I want a virtual assistant, you're gonna do data entry and you're gonna help me with my calendar or make travel plans, like you're gonna get 300 applicants. It's too much. It's too much to handle, right? So one of the first things I do up front in a job post is I will say, hey, in the job post, as you apply, include this word in the subject line, something, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
That will weed out half the applicants right there. Anybody who's not personally replying to job posts, done. Like they're just form application to everything. I don't want to see it, right? From there, so to make sure that you're finding a good person, like it's not just skills that matter. Like this is a long-term thing. You need more than skills. You need personality. You need attention to detail. You need good communication habits. And you can see all of that in a recruiting process if you'll send lots of emails over lots of questions, which it sounds like that's what you did. Or lots of questions over lots of emails.
Yeah.
So this is what I'll do. I will hire that or put the job post out there, get a bunch of applicants, or I'll also contact a bunch of people through online jobs. Like proactively, I'll search for the skills and then I'll start contacting people. I'll take that whole pool and then I'll start asking them the same questions. I'll send them 3 questions in one email and see how they respond. And I'll send them 4 questions in the next email, see how they respond. And when they respond, I'm looking for like, oh, did you answer all 4 questions or did you only answer 3 of them? Because if you did, then the chances of you only doing 3 of 4 tasks that I give you later on is really high. And I can't deal with that, right? Or does it take you 3 days to respond or you just respond the same day? Because if it takes you 3 days to respond, then the chances of you taking 3 days to respond after I've hired you are pretty good. And that doesn't work for me, right?
Yeah.
So those are like important things that I'm doing. I'm looking at their personality. Like, am I excited to get an email from this applicant, or am I like, oh, I don't, I'm like, I don't want this email from this person, right? That gives me a really good indication. Like, oh, you're out of my recruiting process, right?
Yes, that's really smart.
Those are things that I'm doing when I'm recruiting to make sure that like, oh, this person and me fit well. Yeah.
Yeah. So you're talking about both the technical side, quantitative and qualitative. So I think that's really clever, really smart. Another challenge I find, John, when trying to hire someone or find a virtual assistant is how to price them. Because you'll get one person says $500 a month, another one says $1,500 a month. What are some ways we can try to determine the exact value or the exact expense, the exact cost that we should be putting up front for our VA?
Yes, this is one of the things that I do that I fully explain in my recruiting process. The first thing I do is I go to Onlinejobs.ph and I search for the skill that I'm looking for, like video editor, right? I'm going to go on and search video editor and just look at 20 profiles. This will take 5 minutes. I'm going to look at 20 profiles and see like, oh, these are the skills that I'm working with. Like these are the skills that people have. Oh, I can get someone that does video editing and audio editing. Oh, I can get someone that does video editing and who has some social media experience or whatever, right? And then on every one of them, I'm looking at their cost and I'm getting a pretty dang good idea of like, oh, here's the range. Here's the upper end of the range. Here's the lower end of the range. And here's like middle of the road, right? Mm-hmm. And I'll just give you a piece of advice. If you recruit well, you can usually find someone who is, so like, let's say 500 and 1,500, right? And there's an $800 to $1,200 middle of the road, right? I can usually find someone who's $800 a month and who is well above average on skill level. So like below average pay, above average skill. And if you recruit well and you're patient, I can usually find that person, right? Mm-hmm. And I have 26 full-time people and I can get a pretty good record with it, right? You do have to recruit well. And sometimes like I got someone that I pay $2,000 a month to, like They're really dang good, and I love them.
Yeah, but you probably don't start at that price point though. You have to start at one point, and I mean, you've been doing this for a long time, right?
Yeah.
So, do you treat? So let's kind of back it up a little bit. Do you treat a virtual assistant the same way as you might treat an employee who you're working with, who's sitting in your office every day, or are there some differences in the way you might work with them?
I mean, I don't know.
It kind of depends on
I've
the
never
person.
had an office. I've never had a job. Like I graduated from college in 2004. I had a job for 8 months and I quit. But I do try and treat them as I would someone locally. Like I ask them about their family. I ask them about their financial situation. I ask them how they're doing in life. I ask them how their kids are. And so I try really hard to maintain a relationship with them rather than just like, oh, it's a robot on the other side of the world, which I see that often. Like people think, oh, it's a robot. They didn't do this right. Just fire them. And like, dude, that's not going to work.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. I think anytime you're trying to micromanage a human being, it just backfires in your face. I try to get away from that I mentality to the we mentality, we, us, team, rather than boss, employee. I think that you get a better reaction out of people in those situations, you know?
Especially in the Philippines, like the more when there's a problem, the more you look at yourself like, oh, what did I do wrong here?
Yeah.
Or not even what did I like, dude, I didn't do anything wrong here. I know the problem's you, but I'm going to go to you and say, hey, what did I mess up on here that we didn't get this right? Like, what can I do better?
Yeah.
Man, you'll have such a better experience because in the Philippines, like they really don't want to let you down. The more like, hey, the more you do that, like the worse of experience you're going to have.
Yeah. Love that. Super important. Super important. Though, we're covering just a few of these highlighted items, but of course, John has not only the book, The Outsourcing Lever, but he's got a whole video seminar designed to help as well. That's the onevaaway.com, right? I'm curious, oneva.com. Can you tell me a little bit more about that and why that's important to you?
So I mentioned following a recruiting process. I've interviewed dozens and dozens of people who are successful at this, right? Because I mean, I've done it for myself a long time, right? And I can tell you what I do, right? But I've interviewed all these people, and as I've done it, I've noticed, dude, you developed your own recruiting process after you did this a few times. Oh, dude, you developed it. Like, oh, you did. Like all these people developed this recruiting process, and I was like, dude, I got a pretty good recruiting process. My success rate's like 80%, and that's pretty good. Like everybody talks about like, oh, you got to go through a bunch of bad VAs before you find a good one. I'm like, no, you don't, dude. That's garbage. You just have to recruit well, right? And I realized like I have a pretty good process. So I put it together. I hate writing, man. I hate writing. I wrote 38 pages, single space, 38 pages. It was so painful to me, but I wrote out my full recruiting process and then I filmed the whole thing. And I went through it like I'm recruiting someone and here's what I do. And that's what my one VAOA is. So it'll cover like every step of the process. Like, what do I do now? Oh, well, here's what you do now. Oh, what about this? Well, here's what you do with this. Right. So that's what the whole thing is.
I think it's super. I mean, it's incredibly, amazingly important. If you're not finding ways and looking for ways to, again, get this load of this busy work off your back, you can't succeed. And as someone who's gone through multiple VAs without success, I can say that makes a lot of sense. And even, and quite frankly, John, even your YouTube channel is pretty good. It's saying, hey, this is the walkthrough ways of getting where you need to go, finding the right person. To segue or to expand on your point there, you're talking to all these different people that have hired multiple VAs. John, what is the common denominator? What is the one most important common denominator when hiring someone?
I think probably it's recognize things aren't going to go perfectly. Like they're not going to do stuff right the first time. You're going to have to train them. And then recognizing this is a human. Like it's a human employee. Like I've had my first one since 2005. He still works for me, right? I have tons of my people have been with me for 8 or 10 or 15 years, right? The common denominator is they recognize this is a human and they make mistakes and they're not perfect and I have to work with them and this is long term and that's the common denominator among people. Like, oh, this isn't a per project thing. This isn't oh, you're going to do it right or I'm going to fire you, right?
Build that trust, build that relationship over a long period of time. So one of the things that I think is interesting about what you're doing, John, is you've got 17 virtual assistants working for you all at the same time, all doing different projects. How do you keep them all communicating with one another? Do you have any softwares or tips so that, because like you said, you really want to find specialists in different areas, but as someone who's new to this, it's kind of scary because how do I keep them all doing the same thing and working in harmony? How do you execute on that?
So I have a couple things. Number one, I don't manage them all, but I manage a lot of them. And that's because I use Snagit, which is, it's software called Snagit. It's screen capture, screen recording software made by the makers of Camtasia Studio. It sits open on your desktop. Anytime you want to record something, you just drag it out on your computer. It is going to record your screen, so your mouse, your browser window, whatever it is, your software on the computer, whatever you do on the computer, and your voice, it's going to record it. And so I use this every single day, multiple times a day. I'll just open it up and talk. Like, hey, I love what you did here, but let's move this thing over here and let's do this also. Or, hey, look what these guys did with their website and I really like this and let's do it like this. Or, hey, look how this thing's functioning. Like it's not functioning right. So I'll just open it up and record. Or I'll take a screenshot and put an arrow on the image. Like Snagit lets you do all this stuff. When Snagit came out, it 5x'd my ability to handle people, right? Because it's just so fast to get your point across. So that was like my communication with them was I use Snagit, and that's a big deal. Having them communicate with each other. So we use Basecamp, and for project management, that's been a really big deal too. Like I can create a task or they can create a task and include each other in it. And when something goes in, whoever's involved in that task gets notified. And so they're all commenting and I get to see what everyone's thinking and doing. And I get to comment and say like, oh God, great job. Or, hey, let's change this. And someone else will be like, hey, will you please do this or whatever, right? Beyond that, like they created their own Slack, my team. So this is a ways down the road for most people. Like most people, you have one person or you have two people and it's very simple, right? After a few years of doing this, then my team wanted to communicate with each other and they were like, hey, can we like create a Slack channel or something that we can communicate with each other on? I'm like, I don't know. I don't care. Sure. So they did, and they do. And like, there's regular communication on Slack between them. And for a long time I was like, oh, I want to know. And now I'm like, I don't even want to know what you guys are talking about.
Yeah. I heard you on Entrepreneurs on Fire and you're like, I was away from my business for 6 weeks and I came back and everything was better than it was before. And I was like, that's an aha moment, right?
Right. And that was a big aha, like, oh dude, these people are way better than I thought they could be.
Yeah. Like
they not only did they run the things that I was previously doing, and I taught them. Like it wasn't like, oh, I pull someone off the street and they're running my business, right? But dude, a lot of people think that like, oh, I want someone who can build me a business.
Yeah.
Well, that's not how this works, right?
I kind of think of it as you as the business owner, you develop the systems and you find people to execute on those systems, right?
Yeah. And that's probably that's the biggest revelation for me in this whole thing was before I hired someone full-time, long-term, I had hired people. And if they didn't, I hire them hourly, right? And if they do their tasks, then sweet, great. Like I got tasks done.
Yeah.
But when they're not busy, I don't really care because I'm not paying them.
Yeah.
Right. The big revelation for me was, oh, I hired you full-time salaried. And now when you finish your task, I thought this was going to take you 3 days and it took you 4 hours. Now I have to step away from the garbage that I'm doing in my business, like answering stupid emails. And I have to create a system to work. Like I have to work on my business.
Yeah.
Instead of just working in my business all the time. And that came with hiring a full-time salaried virtual assistant, where now all of a sudden I had to be the CEO. And most people never make that transition from being a grunt worker in your business. Like, oh, I got to tweak WordPress like this. Like, no, dude, stop tweaking WordPress and find someone that can do that for you, or teach your current virtual assistant to do WordPress for you, because WordPress isn't that hard to learn. And now you're the CEO rather than being the grunt worker. So today, again, this is a long time into the process, I don't touch anything ever. Like I'm a programmer. I graduated from College of Computer Science. I did programming. I haven't done programming in probably 6 or 7 years now. I never made a post on Facebook. I hate social media. I don't log into our email autoresponder thingy.
Just sipping
Yeah.
margaritas on the beach, basically, right?
Well, yeah. Like, I work, right? I work
Yeah.
about 17 hours a week, a couple hours a day. But all I do is just look at work people have done and give feedback and give instructions. And then I think like through processes, and I'm like, oh, hey, here's how you're going to do this thing.
Yeah. Well, I think if you walk away from this with any sort of knowledge, walk away knowing that you've got to find ways to work on your business instead of in your business, because it's so easy to get caught up in answering the emails and these little simple, stupid tasks that just eat away your day. And you're like, what did I actually do? What did I actually accomplish? I could have been actually building and scaling, because now is the time. Now is the time. There are the resources there for you. John, before we close out here, I just want to remind everyone you can find out more and you can hire your own awesome Filipino assistant at Onlinejobs.ph. You can find John's book at theoutsourcinglever.com. And of course, you can find all the steps that you need to find a great assistant at onevaaway.com. John, rapid fire. You ready?
Maybe.
That's okay. I'm not going to ask you anything super personal, but I do need to know, John, what is one business item that everyone should have that costs less than $25?
So, well, I already talked about this. Snag it. Like,
Snag it.
It's not less than $25. It's $50. But Tiny Take is free. It's not quite as good as Snag it, but it does all the same things. So there's a half and half. Like, it'll change the way you run. Dude, I use it with my wife. I use it with my business partner. I use it with everybody. Like, oh, here's my Snag it video about it, or my image, or what. It's just so much faster than typing out a full long email.
Yeah, I'm with you there. And I use OBS, which is a free software that's pretty flexible as well. So you might want to check out one of those. What's your favorite podcast to listen to?
So I work from home, and I only leave the house really to go mountain biking with my kids.
Love it.
And I don't really listen to many. The only podcast I really listen to is Trainer Road's podcast, and that's about bike race training.
All right, we got it. So I got to dive in a little bit deeper, because I like mountain biking as well. What's the hairiest thing you've done on a mountain bike?
We rode Porcupine Rim in Moab. It's not like super hairy, but
You go over the handlebars at all?
what?
You ever go over the handlebars?
Do I ever?
Have you?
Oh, yeah. You ride bikes, you're going to go over your bars. I mean, you ride mountain bikes, you're going to go over, yeah, for sure. But like my kids race bikes, and they're very competitive. And so like we ride our bikes every day.
Love it.
And so like there's a 2-hour ride today. I go out and ride for 2 hours. We did weights this morning. Like there's part of my day. So
that's awesome. The first platform I created is Actadad, and it's all about fatherhood and the importance of spending that quality time with your kids. So I love it, John. It's awesome.
Thanks.
John, if you woke up in the morning, there was only one business task you could do for the day, what would you do?
That's every day for me. Like the only thing I do is I think through like, what can we do to grow this business? And then I delegate it to people.
Love it.
That's all I do.
If you had a billboard message that could reach millions and millions of people, what would you put on your billboard?
Hire a virtual assistant today. Like it's life-changing. You hire a full-time virtual assistant. I don't care if you have a job. Like I've seen people do this. Like this dude had a job and he went and got a part-time job and just gave it to hired a VA to do the whole part-time job.
Wow.
Like, I don't care what you do. Just hire a virtual assistant and see, like, does this work for me? Because if it works for me, like this is life-changing. Maybe it won't work for you, right? Maybe it's not going to be the same thing for you as it is for me. And maybe you can't hire someone great who can do stuff and they cost you $400 a month for full-time work.
Yeah. Now I believe that you can, and you got to try. If you're going to be successful and get that free time to spend with your family, you got to take these steps. So John, thank you so much for dropping knowledge bombs for everyone today.
Hey, thanks, man. Thanks for having me. This has been awesome.
My pleasure.